wind screamed through the Korengal Valley like a banshee announcing death's arrival. Rachel Walker stood before 6 Navy SEALs in civilian hiking gear, her small frame dwarfed by their tactical presence, her hands trembling as she clutched a worn map. "You need to leave this area immediately," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying an urgency that should have commanded attention. "I've been tracking wildlife migrations for 3 weeks, and I've seen at least 50 armed men moving through these passes since dawn. They're not locals. They're organized and they're heading this way." Commander Jack Harrison, 6'3", with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that had seen too much combat to be impressed by civilian warnings, let out a harsh laugh that echoed off the rocky walls. "And who exactly are you supposed to be? The valley's tour guide? Some kind of military expert with your little bird-watching binoculars?" The other SEALs chuckled, the sound mixing with the mountain wind in a symphony of dismissal. Rachel's cheeks flushed, but she held her ground, spreading the topographical map on a nearby rock. "I'm a wildlife researcher," she said, her finger tracing elevation lines with surprising precision, "but I know what I've seen. These positions here, here, and here," she pointed to 3 strategic overlooks. "They have been setting up since yesterday. Heavy weapons, machine gun nests. This whole valley is becoming a kill box." Sergeant Brad Stevens, younger than Harrison but equally dismissive, stepped forward and snatched the map from her hands. "Listen, lady, we've been doing this since you were probably in college studying bunny rabbits. We don't need some tree hugger telling us how to read terrain." He crumpled the map and tossed it back at her feet. "Why don't you go count some endangered butterflies and leave the real work to the professionals?" Rachel bent to retrieve her map, her movements controlled despite the shaking in her hands. When she straightened, something flickered in her eyes, just for a moment. Something that made Master Chief Roy Patterson pause mid-laugh. It was gone before he could identify it, replaced again by the worried expression of a civilian out of her depth. "Please," she tried one more time, "at least call for backup. Change your route. Something. I've seen what happens when—" She caught herself, biting her lip. "When what?" Harrison moved closer, using his height advantage to loom over her. "When you watch some war documentary, when you read about it in your sociology textbook." His breath smelled of coffee and arrogance. "Get back to your base camp, wherever that is, and stay out of military operational zones. This isn't a national park, and we're not here to babysit civilians who think they know better than trained operators." The way she absorbed the insult, the way her body instinctively shifted weight to her back foot while maintaining eye contact, it was subtle, but Patterson noticed. He'd seen that stance before, in people who knew how to take a hit and keep standing. But before he could process the observation, Lieutenant Cole Martinez was already guiding Rachel toward their jeep, his hand on her elbow with just enough pressure to make it clear she wasn't being asked. "I'm trying to save your lives," Rachel said quietly as Martinez loaded her into the vehicle. She pulled a small notebook from her pocket, tearing out a page covered in coordinates and observations. "These are the positions I've mapped. Please, just look at them." She held the paper out to Martinez, who glanced at Harrison for guidance. The commander made a dismissive gesture, and Martinez let the paper fall to the ground. "The only life you need to worry about saving is your own," Harrison called out as the jeep started. "These mountains aren't safe for civilians. Consider this your official warning to clear out." The bitter irony of his words would haunt him in exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes, when those same mountains would become a death trap that only one person could save them from. "Tell us where you were watching from. Have you ever witnessed someone being completely underestimated only to prove everyone wrong? If you believe that true heroes often come in unexpected packages, and that survival sometimes depends on listening to those we dismiss, hit that subscribe button right now. Your support helps us share these incredible stories of hidden warriors who save lives from the shadows." As the jeep disappeared down the rocky trail, carrying away their only warning, Harrison turned back to his team with a shake of his head. "Civilians," he muttered. "They watch a few YouTube videos about tactics and suddenly think they're operators." The team laughed, but Patterson remained quiet, his eyes following the dust cloud from the departed vehicle. Something about that woman bothered him, something beyond her warnings. The way she'd identified those specific positions without hesitation, the way she'd known exactly where to point on that map without really looking at it. "Hey, Patterson, you going soft on us?" Stevens jabbed him with an elbow. "Don't tell me you're buying into Pocahontas's war games." The racist nickname drew more laughter from the team, all except Patterson and Martinez, who had returned from escorting Rachel away. Martinez looked troubled, though he kept his concerns to himself. He'd felt the woman's arm muscles when he'd guided her to the jeep, felt the kind of definition that didn't come from hiking trails and observing birds. "Just thinking," Patterson finally said. "That's all." But what he was thinking was that her eyes had tracked their weapons with the kind of automatic assessment that came from training, not textbooks. And when she'd mentioned heavy weapons, she'd specifically said DSHK emplacements under her breath, using the precise designation for Soviet heavy machine guns common in this region. No wildlife researcher would know that term. The team continued their patrol pattern, moving through the valley with the confident swagger of apex predators who didn't know they were walking into a carefully constructed trap. The suns climbed higher, casting sharp shadows that could hide 100 dangers. They passed the first position Rachel had marked, and Stevens made a show of waving at the empty rocks. "Oh no, looks like the butterfly lady's bad guys forgot to show up," he mocked. But Patterson noticed something Stevens missed: fresh scratches on the rocks where something heavy had been dragged recently, and a single shell casing glinting in a crevice. 7.62 by 54 millimeter, the kind used in Dragunov sniper rifles. 2 hours passed in deceptive calm. The team cleared 3 scheduled checkpoints, finding nothing but goat trails and the occasional shepherd's shelter. Harrison began to relax, his earlier irritation at the civilians' interruption fading into just another strange encounter in a war zone full of them. They were gods in this valley, he thought, invisible and untouchable. The Taliban feared them, fled before them, and died when they found them. Some anxious woman with a pair of binoculars wasn't going to change that reality. Meanwhile, 1,600 meters above them and 1,800 meters to the south, Rachel Walker sat in a natural hide she'd constructed 3 days earlier. Her wildlife observation post had an unobstructed view of the entire valley, including the 3 positions she'd tried to warn the SEALs about. Through her spotting scope, not binoculars, but a loopholed Mark IV military-grade optic, she watched armed fighters moving into those exact positions. She'd been right about the numbers too. 52 by her current count, with more arriving. Her hands moved across her equipment with practiced efficiency, checking items that no wildlife researcher would carry. A Kestrel weather meter showing wind speeds at various altitudes. A rangefinder that could accurately measure distances beyond 2,000 meters. A notebook filled not with bird observations, but with detailed range cards marking every significant terrain feature in the valley. And partially hidden beneath a tan canvas cloth, something long and angular that caught the morning light when she shifted position. She could leave, should leave, probably. The SEALs had made it clear they didn't want her help, and she had no obligation to stay. Every instinct from 3 years of hiding screamed at her to pack up and disappear before anyone figured out that Rachel Walker, the wildlife researcher, had skills that didn't match her cover story. But something kept her in position, watching. Maybe it was the way that Master Chief had almost recognized something in her. Maybe it was the young lieutenant who'd seemed uncertain about dismissing her warnings. Or maybe it was something else, something she'd thought had died in a different valley, in a different country, on the worst day of her life. The radio beside her crackled with intercepted Taliban communications. Her Pashto was rusty but functional, and what she heard made her blood run cold. They weren't just planning an ambush, they were planning an annihilation. The militia leader, someone called Hakim, was promising his men American weapons and equipment as trophies. He knew exactly how many Americans were in the valley, their patrol pattern, their extraction routes. This wasn't a random encounter. This was a carefully planned execution. In situations like these, military units rely on advanced satellite communication devices that work in remote mountain regions. These military-grade emergency beacons can transmit GPS coordinates and vital signs, even in areas with no cell coverage. Special forces worldwide trust these life-saving devices that have revolutionized rescue operations in hostile territories, enabling rapid response when every second counts. Rachel watched through her scope as the SEALs approached the narrowest part of the valley, a natural choke point that tactical doctrine should have told them to avoid. But they walked through it with casual confidence, unaware that dozens of rifles were tracking their movement from concealed positions above. She could see Harrison in the lead, his arrogance evident even from this distance in the way he barely checked his corners. Stevens was making jokes, she could tell from his body language, probably still mocking the butterfly lady who had tried to warn them. The first shot would come in less than 60 seconds. She could see the Taliban fighter adjusting his position, settling in behind his rifle. Once that first round was fired, the entire valley would erupt. The SEALs would be caught in a crossfire with no cover, no support, and no way out. They would die here, in this valley, because they'd been too proud to listen to a warning from someone they deemed beneath them. Rachel's hand moved to the canvas covering beside her, hesitating. 3 years she'd been hidden. 3 years of being nobody, of watching from the shadows, of letting the world think Ghost Hawk was dead. 3 years of safety and anonymity, all about to end if she acted. But as she watched Martinez help Patterson over a rocky outcrop, saw the way they trusted each other completely, something inside her made the decision. Her fingers pulled back the canvas, revealing the rifle beneath. A Remington 700 custom build that had no business being in a wildlife researcher's possession. The stock was worn from thousands of hours of use, the barrel custom fitted, the scope a military-issue night force that cost more than most people's cars. Her hands found their positions automatically, muscle memory taking over as she settled into a shooting position she'd held 1,000 times before. Through the scope, she could see everything with crystal clarity, the Taliban fighters making final preparations, the SEALs walking deeper into the kill zone, and in exactly 43 seconds, all hell was going to break loose. She couldn't stop the ambush from happening, but maybe, just maybe, she could make sure those arrogant men who'd dismissed her lived long enough to regret it. The radio chatter increased suddenly, Taliban voices excited and eager. 30 seconds, someone said in Pashto. Wait for Hakim's signal. Rachel's breathing slowed automatically, her heart rate dropping into the zone that shooters called the calm. She had pre-calculated the range to 16 different positions, memorized wind patterns at various altitudes, and already chosen her first 5 targets. When this started, she'd have maybe 3 minutes before they figured out her position and sent people to kill her. 3 minutes to save 6 men who thought she was nothing more than a scared civilian with delusions of tactical knowledge. Harrison's team reached the center of the kill zone, exactly where Hakim wanted them. Through her scope, Rachel could see the Taliban leader raising his hand, about to give the signal that would start the slaughter. Her finger found the trigger, taking up the slack with practiced precision. She wouldn't fire first. That would give away her position too early. But the second Hakim's people opened up, she'd remind them why certain names became legends in these mountains. The wind shifted slightly, 2 miles per hour from the west at her elevation. She adjusted her hold automatically, not even conscious of the calculation anymore. In the valley below, Stevens was laughing at something, his head thrown back in amusement. Harrison was checking his GPS, probably confirming they were on schedule. Patterson had stopped, though, his head turning slowly as if he'd heard something. That Master Chief had good instincts. Unfortunately, good instincts weren't going to be enough for what was about to happen. A single shot shattered the mountain silence, the sound echoing off the canyon walls like thunder. Martinez went down hard, blood spreading across his left shoulder. The reaction was instant and professional. The SEALs scattered for whatever cover they could find, returning fire at muzzle flashes that seemed to come from everywhere at once. But the cover was minimal, the enemy position superior, and the volume of incoming fire overwhelming. Contact left, contact right, contact front. The calls came rapid fire over their comms as Harrison tried to establish some kind of defensive position. Another SEAL went down, Chen, clutching his leg where a round had punched through his thigh. They were completely surrounded, exactly as Rachel had warned them, caught in a perfect kill box with no way out. From her position, Rachel could see everything. The Taliban fighters exposing themselves as they fired, confident in their numerical superiority. She could see Hakim directing the battle from a protected position, could see the RPG team setting up to finish what the rifle fire started, and she could see the SEALs, professional even in desperation, trying to establish a defensive perimeter with nowhere near enough cover to survive. Her first shot was perfect, the rifle barely moving as it sent a match-grade round across 1,800 meters of mountain air. The Taliban machine gunner, who'd been laying down the heaviest fire, simply collapsed, his weapon going silent. Her second shot followed 3 seconds later, catching his ammunition bearer before the man even realized his partner was dead. The third shot eliminated the RPG gunner just as he was about to fire. In the valley, Patterson's head snapped up at the distinctive sound of a large-caliber rifle from an unexpected direction. "We've got a shooter on the mountain!" he called out, but Harrison was too focused on their immediate survival to process what that might mean. Rachel worked methodically, choosing targets that would have the maximum impact on the enemy's ability to coordinate their attack. She wasn't trying to win the fight. One rifle against 50 was impossible. But she could disrupt, confuse, and most importantly, buy time. Every shot was calculated to create maximum psychological impact. Leaders, heavy weapons operators, anyone who looked like they were coordinating the attack. This is where everything changes. If Rachel's intervention is giving you chills, share this video with someone who loves military stories. Drop a comment below. Do you think the SEALs should have listened to her warnings? Subscribe and ring the bell for more jaw-dropping tales of hidden warriors. 7 shots in 45 seconds, each one perfect, each one eliminating a key target. The Taliban fighters began to realize they were taking fire from an unexpected direction, their heads swiveling as they tried to locate this new threat. Some turned their weapons toward the mountain, spraying rounds in her general direction, but nowhere close to her actual position. The volume of fire on the SEALs decreased by half as confusion spread through the enemy ranks. "Whoever's up there, keep shooting," Harrison yelled into his radio, not knowing if the unknown shooter could hear him. His team was still pinned down, Chen bleeding badly despite medical attention, their ammunition running dangerously low. But the mysterious sniper had given them breathing room, and Harrison was too much of a professional to waste it. Rachel shifted position slightly, knowing she had maybe another minute before someone competent figured out her location. Through her scope, she could see a Taliban sub-commander organizing a squad to flank the SEAL's position. She led him perfectly, accounting for his movement and the wind, squeezing the trigger between heartbeats. The man dropped mid-stride, his squad scattering in panic, but she could also see more fighters moving in from the east, reinforcements that would overwhelm the SEALs regardless of her intervention. Hakim was screaming into his radio, demanding someone find and kill the sniper. She could hear it all through her intercepted communications, understood every word of Pashto and Dari they spoke. They were calling her the Ghost already, which would have been ironically amusing if the situation wasn't so desperate. One of the Taliban fighters got smart, using a signaling mirror to coordinate with others in trying to locate her position. The flash of light gave away his location, and Rachel's next shot removed him from the equation. But his idea spread, and soon multiple fighters were trying to triangulate her position based on the sound of her shots. Time was running out. In the valley, the SEALs had managed to consolidate into a better defensive position behind a cluster of rocks, but it was temporary at best. Their ammunition was critically low. Patterson called out that he was down to his last 2 magazines. Chen had lost consciousness from blood loss, and Martinez could barely hold his rifle with his injured shoulder. They needed extraction immediately, but the helicopter couldn't come until the landing zone was secure, and there was no way to secure it with this many hostiles. Rachel made a decision that went against every principle of sniper fieldcraft. Instead of continuing to hide, she deliberately skylined herself for just a moment, letting the Taliban see her silhouette against the morning sky. The reaction was immediate. Dozens of rifles swung toward her position, fighters pointing and shouting. Hakim himself stood up from his covered position to look, exactly as she'd hoped. The shot was over 2,100 meters, with a crosswind that varied at 3 different altitudes between her and the target. It should have been impossible. But the rifle spoke one more time, and Hakim's command structure disintegrated as their leader fell. The psychological impact was devastating. Their commander dead from an impossible distance, killed by a ghost they couldn't see or reach. The Taliban forces began to fragment, some continuing the attack while others pulled back in confusion. It was enough. Harrison, recognizing the opportunity, organized a fighting withdrawal toward a more defensible position. They moved in pairs, one covering while the other moved, professional even with 3 wounded and ammunition nearly exhausted. The mysterious sniper continued to provide cover, every shot eliminating someone who tried to pursue them. But Rachel's position was finally compromised. She could see a squad of fighters moving up the mountain toward her, using proper bounding overwatch techniques that suggested military training. She had perhaps 5 minutes before they reached her hide, time to disappear, to become the wildlife researcher again, to maintain the fiction that had kept her safe for 3 years. Instead, she stayed in position for one more shot. The Taliban had set up a new machine gun position that would cut the SEALs down if they tried to reach the extraction point. It was a difficult shot, the gunner partially concealed behind rocks, only a small portion of his upper body exposed. But she'd made harder shots, in worse conditions, when other lives had depended on her. The rifle spoke one final time, and the machine gun went silent. Then Rachel was moving, breaking down her shooting position with practiced efficiency, but she wasn't retreating. She was repositioning, moving to a secondary hide she'd established days earlier. The SEALs still needed cover to reach their extraction point, and she'd be damned if she was going to let them die just because they'd been too arrogant to listen to a warning. As she moved through the rocks, her mind processed the tactical situation automatically. The SEALs had maybe 10 minutes of ammunition left at their current rate of fire. The helicopter would need at least 15 minutes to reach them once called. The math didn't work unless someone kept the Taliban suppressed, and she was the only one in position to do it. Her radio crackled with American military communications. She'd been monitoring their frequency since the ambush started. Any station, this is Talon 7. We are taking heavy fire and need immediate extraction. 3 wounded, ammunition critical. Unknown friendly sniper providing support, but we're about to be overrun. Harrison's voice, no longer arrogant, no longer dismissive, just a professional soldier trying to keep his men alive against impossible odds. Rachel could have felt satisfaction at his desperation, but all she felt was the familiar weight of responsibility. American soldiers were going to die unless she acted, and everything else, her cover, her safety, her 3 years of carefully maintained anonymity, was secondary to that fact. She reached her secondary position just as the Taliban squad arrived at her first hide. They found nothing but shell casings and a ghost of perfume that didn't match the cordite and gun oil. One of them held up the brass, examining it with confusion. The markings were in English, but not standard military issue. Custom loads, handcrafted for precision that exceeded anything in standard ammunition. From her new position, Rachel could see the entire battlefield. The SEALs had made it halfway to the extraction point, but Taliban reinforcements were moving to cut them off. At least 20 fighters were maneuvering through the rocks, trying to get ahead of the Americans. If they succeeded, the SEALs would be trapped again, this time with no ammunition and nowhere to go. She had 11 rounds left, 20 targets. The math was impossible, but she'd dealt with impossible before. Her breathing slowed again, dropping into that calm space where time stretched and everything became clear. She wouldn't be able to stop them all, but she could make them hesitate, make them take cover, make them slow down just enough for the SEALs to get through. The first 3 shots came in rapid succession, so fast that the Taliban fighters didn't immediately realize they were taking fire from a new position. 3-point men dropped, their advance immediately stalling as the others scrambled for cover. The psychological effect was exactly what Rachel had hoped for. They thought there might be multiple snipers, an entire team of ghosts haunting these mountains. Sniper! Sniper! The calls went up in Pashto and Dari, fighters pointing in multiple directions, confused about where the shots had originated. Some pointed toward her old position, others toward completely different areas of the mountain. The confusion bought precious seconds as the SEALs continued their withdrawal. But one Taliban fighter was smarter than the others. He'd been watching the bullet impacts, calculating angles, and he pointed directly at her position. "There!" he shouted in accented English. "The ghost is there!" A dozen rifles swung toward her, and Rachel knew she had seconds before her position became untenable. She made those seconds count. 4 more shots, 4 more targets down. The fighters pointing at her were the first to go, their knowledge dying with them. But others saw where they'd been looking, saw the faint muzzle flash from her rifle. Rounds began impacting around her position, chunks of rock exploding as bullets sought her location. Time to move again. But as she prepared to displace, she saw something that made her blood freeze. Stevens, the SEAL who'd mocked her most cruelly, had been separated from his team. He was pinned behind a rocky outcrop, wounded in the leg, unable to move while Taliban fighters closed in on his position. His team was trying to get to him, but they were taking heavy fire, forced back every time they tried. The smart move was to let him die. He'd dismissed her warnings, called her Pocahontas, treated her like she was worthless. His arrogance had contributed to this situation, and saving him would require revealing herself, abandoning her covered position for open ground where she'd be completely exposed. Rachel watched through her scope as Stevens tried to tourniquet his own leg with shaking hands, his face pale from blood loss. She saw him trying to raise his rifle one-handed, preparing to fight to the end. She saw the Taliban fighters getting closer, eager to capture or kill an American special operator. The mathematics of death had never been more precise. Through her scope, Rachel watched the wounded RPG gunner dragging himself back into position. his blood painting a dark trail across the rocks as he struggled to lift his weapon toward the SEAL's defensive position. 600 meters to her east, Ahmed had settled into his shooting position, his rifle tracking the incoming Black Hawk helicopter that was now less than 2 minutes out. One bullet left in her custom Remington. 2 targets, 6 American lives hanging in the balance, with no margin for error. The wind gusted suddenly, pushing dust and debris across the valley floor. Rachel's trained mind automatically calculated the adjustment. 4 clicks right, 2 up. But which target? The RPG gunner was closer, more immediate. His rocket would kill at least 2 SEALs if he managed to fire. But Ahmad was the deadlier threat. His position gave him a clear shot at the helicopter's cockpit. One well-placed round would send the Black Hawk spinning into the mountain, killing the pilot and destroying any chance of extraction. She made her decision in that space between heartbeats where life and death lived as intimate companions. The rifle swung smoothly eastward, settling on Ahmad's position. 1,800 meters through gusting wind, falling snow beginning to obscure visibility, atmospheric pressure dropping with the approaching storm. It was a shot at the very edge of possibility, the kind Marcus would have called dancing with physics. Her finger found the trigger's sweet spot, that perfect place where the mechanism would break without disturbing her aim. She exhaled half a breath, felt her heartbeat slow to that familiar rhythm of absolute calm. The crosshairs settled on Ahmed's center mass, accounting for wind drift, bullet drop, the Coriolis effect at this distance. The rifle pushed back against her shoulder with its familiar violence. Through her scope, she tracked the bullet's flight path, those eternal seconds where physics and fate intersected. Ahmed was adjusting his rifle, his finger moving toward the trigger, when the round took him just below the sternum. There was no dramatic fall, no theatrical death. He simply slumped forward over his rifle, his finger never completing its journey to the trigger that would have killed 8 Americans. But the RPG gunner had recovered now. Rachel watched helplessly as he brought the weapon to his shoulder, the SEALs completely exposed in their defensive position. She reached for her Glock 19, knowing the range was impossible for a pistol, knowing she had to try anyway. Her hand had just touched the grip when she heard them. Footsteps behind her, multiple sets, moving with the practiced stealth of experienced fighters. She spun to find 3 Taliban fighters emerging from behind the rock formation, having climbed the reverse slope while she was focused on the valley below. They stood in a loose semicircle, AK-47s raised but not quite aimed, their faces showing the particular satisfaction of hunters who had cornered the most dangerous game. They had expected to find an American Special Forces sniper, probably male, certainly military. Instead, they found a small woman in civilian hiking clothes, her face streaked with dirt, her hands covered in blood from the morning's work. The leader, a scarred man with intelligent dark eyes, spoke in Pashto. His words translated roughly to, "Drop your weapon, woman. You're worth more alive than dead." Rachel understood every word but kept her expression blank, playing the terrified civilian while her mind calculated angles, distances, and probabilities. 3 fighters, approximately 4 meters away, armed with AK-47s. Her Glock had 8 rounds remaining. The mathematics were possible, but only if she moved perfectly, and only if none of them were wearing body armor beneath their loose clothing. "Please," she said in accented English, making her voice high and frightened, letting her hands tremble visibly. "I'm just a researcher. I was hiking when the shooting started. Please don't hurt me." The leader laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the rocks. He said something to his companions in Pashto that made them grin, something about American women bringing good prices in certain markets across the border. They relaxed fractionally, seeing her as commodity rather than threat, their rifle barrels dropping just a few degrees. That tiny decrease in alertness was all she needed. Rachel moved like water suddenly transformed into lightning. The Glock came up in a smooth arc that had been practiced 10,000 times, muscle memory overriding conscious thought. The first 2 shots took the leader's center mass before his expression could shift from amusement to surprise. She was already pivoting as his body began to fall, the pistol tracking to the second fighter, who was just beginning to raise his rifle. 2 more shots, grouped tightly despite the speed of her movement, and he spun away, clutching his chest. The third fighter managed to get his rifle up, managed to pull the trigger, but Rachel was already dropping beneath his line of fire. The bullets cracked through the air where she'd been standing as she rolled left, came up on one knee, and put 3 rounds into him before he could adjust his aim. He fell backward, his rifle clattering against the rocks, and suddenly the ridge was quiet, except for her harsh breathing and the distant sound of helicopter rotors growing closer. But the brief firefight had cost her. She felt warmth spreading down her left side and realized one of those wild shots had found her, punching through just below her ribs. Not immediately fatal. The bullet had missed her vital organs, but serious enough to be a major problem. She pressed her hand against the wound, feeling blood seep between her fingers, and forced herself to focus on the immediate situation. The helicopter was 90 seconds out now, and she could see the SEALs preparing for extraction. They had made it to a slightly more defensible position, but Taliban reinforcements were pouring in from the east. At least 20 fresh fighters, eager and well-armed, moving in disciplined formations that suggested military training. The SEALs had perhaps 30 rounds between them. It wouldn't be nearly enough. Rachel stumbled to the edge of the ridge, looking for anything she could use. The dead fighters' AK-47s had full magazines, not ideal for precision work at distance, but infinitely better than nothing. She grabbed one, checked the action with practiced efficiency, and settled into a modified prone position that took pressure off her wounded side. The rifle felt alien in her hands after years of custom-built precision weapons, but she had started her career with rifles like this, had learned to make them sing before she'd ever touched the weapons that would make her famous. The Taliban reinforcements were moving in two groups, using proper tactical spacing that indicated military training. These weren't farmers with rifles, or young men seeking martyrdom. These were experienced fighters who knew how to dorsio assault a position. They were confident too, knowing they had numerical superiority and that the Americans were almost out of ammunition. Rachel opened fire, not with the surgical precision of her earlier shots, but with sustained, accurate fire that made the enemy reconsider their approach. The AK-47 barked in controlled 3-round bursts, walking rounds across the advancing fighters' positions. She wasn't trying for kills now. She was trying for suppression, trying to buy time, trying to make them slow down and take cover. Advanced military life insurance policies specifically designed for high-risk special operations personnel provide comprehensive coverage that standard policies won't touch. These specialized plans offer immediate death benefits up to $5 million, with no combat exclusions or geographical restrictions. Premiums are adjusted for deployment schedules, and beneficiaries receive expedited payments within 72 hours. Coverage includes traumatic injury benefits, disappearance clauses for MIA situations, and educational trusts that guarantee full college funding for all dependent children. In the valley below, Commander Harrison heard the distinctive chatter of AK fire from the ridge, and initially thought their guardian angel had been killed, that enemy forces had taken the high ground. But then he realized the fire was being directed at Taliban positions, not at them. Someone up there was still fighting, still protecting them, even with captured enemy weapons. "Whoever's up there just switched to enemy weapons," Patterson observed, his voice tight with respect and concern. "They're either wounded or out of ammunition. Maybe both." The Black Hawk appeared over the eastern ridge, a beautiful sight with its door gunners already laying down suppressive fire. It flared into a hover 50 feet above the SEAL's position, ropes dropping like black lifelines from heaven. But the Taliban forces immediately shifted their fire toward it, and Rachel could see another RPG team setting up on the eastern slope. If they got that rocket off, the helicopter and everyone aboard would become a flaming memorial to tactical failure. She shifted her fire immediately, emptying the remainder of her magazine at the RPG position. The rounds struck around them, forcing them into cover, buying precious seconds. But the rifle ran dry, its bolt locking back on an empty chamber. She had to roll quickly to grab another weapon from the second dead fighter, sending fresh spikes of agony through her wounded side. By the time she got back into position, the RPG team was up again, the gunner steadying his weapon for the shot that would turn rescue into tragedy. No time for careful aim, no time for calculations. Rachel switched the AK to full automatic and held the trigger down, walking the entire magazine across the RPG position in a desperate attempt to disrupt their shot. The gunner fired just as her rounds reached him, but the impacts threw off his aim. The rocket launched high and wide, passing within 3 feet of the helicopter's tail rotor, but not connecting. The aircraft lurched away from the near miss while the door gunners poured devastating fire into the RPG position, eliminating the threat permanently. The SEALs were loading now, the wounded being winched up first, while the others provided what security they could with their dwindling ammunition. Rachel could see Harrison looking up toward her ridge, could see him speaking urgently into his radio. A moment later, his voice crackled through the emergency frequency she'd been monitoring. "Unknown friendly, this is Talon 7 actual. We're not leaving without you. Can you make it to our position?" Rachel looked at the distance. 300 meters of completely exposed slope with at least a dozen Taliban fighters between her and the extraction point. With her wound, it would be like running through a shooting gallery wearing a target on her back. She keyed the radio with a blood-slick hand. "Negative, Talon 7. I'm pinned down and wounded. Get your people out. That's an order." There was a pause, then Harrison's voice came back, harder now, carrying the authority of someone who had never left anyone behind. "I don't take orders from people who won't identify themselves. We're coming for you." "Don't be stupid," Rachel snapped, forgetting to maintain her calm civilian demeanor. "You have wounded who need immediate medical attention. You cannot risk the entire team for one person you don't even know." But she could already see two figures fast roping from the hovering helicopter, despite the continuing ground fire. Patterson and Martinez, both wounded themselves, were coming for her. The absolute insanity of it. Elite operators risking their lives for someone who had hidden their identity, someone they had dismissed and mocked just hours earlier, made her simultaneously furious and profoundly moved. She grabbed the last AK-47 from the fighter she had killed first and began laying down covering fire for the two SEALs. Every shot sent lightning bolts of pain through her wounded side, but she kept firing, kept the Taliban fighters' heads down, while Patterson and Martinez bounded up the slope toward her position. They moved like the elite warriors they were, one covering while the other advanced, but they were taking fire from multiple directions. Martinez stumbled suddenly, a round catching his already wounded shoulder and spinning him halfway around. He went down hard, and Patterson immediately moved to cover him. That's when something extraordinary happened. From the helicopter, the other SEALs began fast roping down, despite their wounds. Stevens with his tourniquet leg that must have been agony with every movement, Chen barely conscious from blood loss, even Harrison himself. They all came. Not because it was tactically sound, not because it made any operational sense, but because they were living a code that said no one gets left behind, not even someone whose name they didn't know. They formed a defensive line and began pushing up the slope, their coordinated fire driving the Taliban fighters back. It was magnificent and insane in equal measure, wounded American warriors risking everything for an unknown shooter who had saved their lives. Rachel found herself blinking away tears that had nothing to do with the pain from her wound. Patterson reached her first, his eyes widening as he took in her condition. Her shirt was soaked with blood, her face pale from shock and blood loss. "Ma'am, you're hit bad. We need to move now." She tried to stand and immediately stumbled, her legs suddenly refusing to cooperate. The blood loss was worse than she had thought, and the edges of her vision were beginning to gray out. Patterson caught her before she fell, his arm going around her waist to support her weight. "I can walk," she protested weakly, even as he essentially carried her. "Sure you can," Patterson agreed with grim humor. "Just like Stevens can run marathons right now. Stop being stubborn and let us help you." They started down the slope, Martinez providing cover despite his wounded shoulder, while Patterson half-carried, half-dragged Rachel toward the extraction point. The Taliban fighters, seeing their quarry escaping, surged forward with renewed fury. Bullets cracked and whined around them, throwing up spurts of dirt and rock fragments. Rachel tried to return fire with her pistol, but her hands were shaking too badly from blood loss to be effective. 50 meters from the helicopter, disaster struck. A Taliban fighter appeared from behind a boulder outcropping, his rifle already aimed at Patterson's exposed back. Rachel saw him, tried to raise her weapon, but her wounded body wouldn't respond fast enough. The fighter's finger was tightening on the trigger. She knew Patterson was about to die because of her. Another good man killed because she couldn't make the shot when it mattered most. The fighter's head snapped back suddenly, a neat hole appearing in his forehead. He toppled backward, his unfired rifle falling from nerveless fingers. Rachel looked up to see Stevens, the man who had called her Pocahontas, balanced on his one good leg in the helicopter's door, his rifle still pointed at where the fighter had been. The shot had been perfect, the kind of precision that came from years of training and an absolute refusal to let a teammate die. They reached the helicopter, multiple hands pulling them aboard as the door gunners laid down a devastating base of fire. The pilot was shouting about multiple warning lights and fuel levels, but he held his position until everyone was aboard. As they lifted off, racing away from the valley that had almost claimed them all, Rachel found herself lying on the vibrating metal floor. surrounded by the men she had saved. Her vision was fading in and out, blood loss finally overwhelming her system. She could hear their voices, feel their hands applying pressure bandages to her wound, see the concern in their eyes. Someone was calling for the medic. Someone else was setting up an IV line with practiced efficiency. "Stay with us," Harrison commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who was used to being obeyed even by death itself. "You don't get to save our lives and then die on us. That's not how this works. Subscribe right now and hit the notification bell." The shocking revelation about this mysterious sniper's true identity is about to change everything. You won't believe who she really is and why she was in those mountains. This is the moment that will leave you speechless. Rachel wanted to tell him that was exactly how it often worked, that the price of saving others was sometimes your own life, that Marcus had proven that 3 years ago. But the words wouldn't come. Her vision was narrowing to a tunnel, darkness creeping in from the edges. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness claimed her was Patterson holding something up, something that had fallen from her pack during the fight, a photograph. Even through her fading vision, she could see his eyes widening in sudden recognition, his mouth opening in shock. She came back to consciousness slowly, like swimming up through thick black water toward a distant light. First came the sounds, the steady rhythmic beep of medical monitors, the distant murmur of professional voices, the soft whoosh of a ventilator that she realized with relief wasn't connected to her. Then came the smells, that distinctive combination of antiseptic, floor wax, and industrial laundry that could only mean a military hospital. Finally came the pain, a deep burning ache in her side that spoke of surgery and significant trauma. Opening her eyes took enormous effort, but when she managed it, she found herself in a private room flooded with afternoon sunlight. She wasn't alone. The entire SEAL team was there, some in wheelchairs, others on crutches, all bearing the evidence of their wounds, but all very much alive. And standing by the window, backlit by the sun like some figure from her past, was someone she hadn't expected to see, Colonel Robert Nash. Nash had been her commanding officer in Delta Force, the man who had signed off on Operation Viper, the man who had authorized her disappearance from official records 3 years ago, when she had walked away from everything after Marcus died. His presence here meant her cover was completely blown. "Welcome back, Captain Walker," Nash said simply, his voice carrying a weight of knowledge that made her stomach drop. The words hung in the air like a confession, like an ending. Her carefully maintained identity, 3 years of being nobody, of being invisible, had ended on a mountain ridge in Afghanistan, traded for the lives of 6 Navy SEALs who had treated her like she was worthless. "How?" she asked, her voice rough from the intubation tube that had been removed. Patterson stepped forward, holding up the photograph, the one of her and Marcus at Firebase Kandahar, taken just 2 weeks before Operation Viper. They were both in their ghillie suits, both smiling at the camera with the easy confidence of operators at the top of their game. Marcus had his arm around her shoulders, and she was laughing at something he had just said. It was the last photo ever taken of them together. "I recognize the location," Patterson said quietly, his voice carrying a mix of awe and recognition. "Firebase Viper. I was there 2 weeks after the incident. I was part of the quick reaction force that responded when everything went wrong. I saw the after-action photos, read the classified reports." He paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "Captain Rachel Walker, call sign Ghost Hawk, was listed as MIA, presumed KIA. But everyone knew what MIA meant in those mountains. It meant the body was never recovered. It meant there was no confirmation of death. And then I made some calls," Nash added, moving away from the window, "pulled some files that aren't supposed to exist, checked some timelines that raised interesting questions. A wildlife researcher shows up in the exact area where Ghost Hawk disappeared, same height, same build, same unusual gray-green eyes, teaching English to local children just like Rachel Walker used to do during Hearts and Minds operations. Either it was the world's biggest coincidence, or Ghost Hawk had been hiding in plain sight for 3 years. Rachel closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her exposed identity settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. Everything she had worked to build, the anonymity that had allowed her to operate freely, was gone. "How many people know?" she asked, not opening her eyes. "Officially, nobody," Nash replied. "This conversation isn't happening. You're not here. Ghost Hawk is still listed as MIA, presumed KIA. Unofficially, The people in this room and maybe 3 others with security clearances that technically don't exist. Your secret is safe if you want it to be. She opened her eyes and looked at the SEALs, these men who had risked their lives to save her after she had saved them. Harrison's expression was a complex mixture of awe, shame, and something that looked like physical pain. Stevens couldn't meet her eyes at all, staring at his hands folded in his lap. Martinez looked like he might be sick, his face pale despite his natural complexion. Chen kept opening his mouth as if to speak, then closing it again, unable to find words. Davis sat in absolute silence, his jaw clenched tight. It was Patterson who finally broke the suffocating silence. 317 confirmed kills, he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. The deadliest American sniper in history. More silver stars and bronze stars than most entire units earn collectively. The only woman to ever complete Delta Force sniper school. Multiple black operations that are so classified they don't officially exist. He paused, taking a shaky breath. And we called you Pocahontas. We threw you out of our operations center like you were some hysterical civilian. We mocked you, dismissed you, physically escorted you from the room when you tried to save our lives. You didn't know, Rachel said simply, her voice carrying no anger, only exhaustion. That's not an excuse, Harrison interjected, his command voice firm despite the emotion underneath it. We didn't listen because of what you looked like, because you were a woman, because you didn't fit our mental image of someone worth listening to. Our arrogance, our prejudice, our complete failure as leaders almost got us killed. And you saved us anyway. Stevens finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed with more than just pain from his wounds. After what I said to you, the way I treated you, the racist nickname... His voice broke. Why? Why didn't you just let us die? We would have deserved it. Rachel was quiet for a long moment, gathering strength to tell a story she had never told anyone, not even Nash. The room waited in absolute silence, even the medical equipment seeming to pause in anticipation. My husband, Marcus Walker, was my spotter for 5 years, she began, her voice steady despite the pain of the memories. We met in sniper school at Fort Benning. He was this impossibly talented kid from Oklahoma who could read wind patterns like other people read books, could calculate ballistic adjustments in his head faster than most people could do it with computers. She paused, a sad smile touching her lips. We were competitive at first. I was trying to prove that a woman could be just as good as any man. He was trying to prove that a farm boy from nowhere could compete with anyone. We pushed each other, challenged each other, made each other better, and somewhere along the way, we fell in love. We were more than just a sniper team. We were perfect partners. In the field, we could communicate without words. He knew what I was thinking before I thought it. I knew what he needed before he asked. Together, we had a perfect record. 317 confirmed kills without a single mission failure. They called us the Ghost Team because we could appear anywhere, eliminate any target, and disappear without a trace. Her voice grew quieter, more strained. The day he died was our 5th wedding anniversary. We had been in position for 43 hours, waiting for a high-value target to appear. I was tired, hungry, and I wanted to get back to base because Marcus had somehow managed to arrange for a cake to be delivered to Firebase Viper. A real cake, with actual frosting, in the middle of Afghanistan. Tears were running down her face now, but she didn't seem to notice. When the target finally appeared, I rushed the shot. Just by 1 second, maybe half a second, the bullet hit his body armor instead of finding the gap I was aiming for. He survived, his security detail traced the shot back to our position, and suddenly we had 40-plus fighters converging on our hide. Marcus held them off for 7 hours while I escaped. 7 hours of fighting alone so I could live. When his ammunition ran low, he called in a danger-close airstrike on his own position rather than be captured. His last words to me over the radio were, "Keep watching over them, Rach. They all deserve to come home." The room was absolutely silent. Even the tough Navy SEALs had tears in their eyes. So, that's what I've been doing for 3 years, watching, protecting, making sure American soldiers come home, even the ones who would dismiss me as worthless. Because that's what Marcus would have done. Because every life I save is his legacy continuing. Because if I stop, if I let even one American die when I could have prevented it, then his sacrifice means nothing. How many? Nash asked quietly. How many operations have you influenced from the shadows? Rachel looked at him steadily. 43 confirmed interventions over 3 years. Anonymous tips to patrols that prevented ambushes. Intelligence reports that saved convoys. 7 times I had to take direct action with kinetic engagement. This was the first time I couldn't maintain my cover. 43, Harrison breathed. You've been running solo Guardian Angel operations for 3 years with no support, no backup, no recognition? Recognition gets people killed, Rachel replied flatly. Every Taliban fighter who finds out Ghost Hawk is alive will come hunting. Not just for me, but for anyone who might have helped me. The villagers who sold supplies to a wildlife researcher. The children I taught English to. The shepherds who shared their tea with a lonely American woman in the mountains. They'd all become targets. Nash moved closer to her bed, his expression serious. Which brings us to the current situation. The Taliban is already spreading word that Ghost Hawk is alive. They found the bodies on the ridge, analyzed the shot patterns, recognized the precision of your work. 3 of their fighters taken down with perfect headshots from a pistol at close range. One of them supposedly told his comrades before he died that he saw your tattoo. Rachel's hand moved instinctively to her shoulder, where her shirt had been torn during the fight. The tattoo was there, Ghost Hawk, above a stylized rifle scope crosshairs, with 317 confirmed below it, and underneath in smaller text, for Marcus, until Valhalla. It was the same tattoo Marcus had designed for both of them, though his had read Ghost Team Spotter, watching her 6 until Valhalla. So, I disappear again, Rachel said simply. Deeper this time, maybe Pakistan, maybe somewhere else entirely. Rachel Walker, the wildlife researcher, ceases to exist. I become someone new. Or, Nash said carefully, you come back, officially. We bring Ghost Hawk back from the dead, give you the support you should have had all along, full operational status, resources, backup when you need it. Rachel shook her head immediately. That would make me a target and compromise every operation. Ghost Hawk works because nobody knows where she is. The moment you make her official, she becomes trackable, predictable, killable. Then we do something else, Harrison interjected, surprising everyone. We keep you dead officially, but we make sure you have everything you need. Black budget funding, equipment drops, intelligence support. You keep being the ghost, but now you're our ghost. Your ghost? Rachel asked, raising an eyebrow despite the pain it caused. The task force is Guardian Angel, Harrison explained, warming to his idea. We operate in these mountains regularly. You know the terrain better than anyone. You know the people, the languages, the patterns. You could provide overwatch we don't even know we need, intelligence from sources we can't access. And in return, we make sure you have everything required to keep operating. Nash considered this, stroking his chin thoughtfully. It's unconventional, but it could work. You would maintain your cover identity, but with full support from people who actually know who you are. No official connection, no paper trail, just operational necessity. And them? Rachel asked, gesturing to the SEALs. They can't go around knowing Ghost Hawk is alive. That kind of information has a way of spreading, no matter how careful people are. We can keep a secret, Stephen said firmly, finally finding his voice. We owe you that much. Hell, we owe you everything. It's not about owing, Rachel replied. It's about operational security. The more people who know, the more dangerous it becomes for everyone. Patterson leaned forward in his wheelchair. Ma'am, with all due respect, you've been doing this alone for 3 years. You've been carrying this burden by yourself, with no one to watch your 6, no one to share the load. Maybe it's time to trust someone else. Maybe it's time to let us help you the way you helped us. Rachel looked at each of them in turn, these men who had gone from dismissing her to risking their lives for her in the span of a single morning. The isolation of the past 3 years suddenly felt crushing, the weight of carrying Marcus's legacy alone almost unbearable. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was time to trust again. There would have to be rules, she said finally. No official contact, no records, no attempting to find me unless it's operational necessity. I stay dead to everyone except the people in this room. Agreed, Harrison said immediately. And if I send you intelligence, you act on it. No dismissing it because it comes from unconventional sources. No assuming you know better because you're the professionals. Never again, Harrison promised, and the shame in his voice made it clear he meant it. And you never speak of this to anyone. Not your wives, not your teammates, not your commanders. Ghost Hawk stays dead. Understood, they all replied in unison. Nash pulled out a secure satellite phone, one of the type that officially didn't exist. Then let's make this official in the most unofficial way possible. Ghost Hawk remains KIA in all records. Rachel Walker, the wildlife researcher, continues her work in the mountains. But if American forces need a guardian angel, she happens to be available. Elite tactical training programs developed by former special operations snipers are now available through certified online platforms. These comprehensive courses cover everything from basic marksmanship to advanced ballistic calculations, wind reading, and position selection. Each module includes both theoretical knowledge and practical exercises that can be practiced at approved ranges. All courses emphasize legal compliance, safety protocols, and ethical considerations. Professional certification available for law enforcement and military personnel. Enrollment is limited to maintain quality instruction standards. Over the next 3 weeks, Rachel recovered from her wounds while the new arrangement took shape around her. Equipment began appearing at predetermined dead drops throughout the mountains. Custom ammunition for her rifle, medical supplies that weren't available on the civilian market, communication gear that connected her to intelligence networks she had only dreamed of accessing during her years of isolation. Her wildlife research station was quietly rebuilt with hidden compartments, reinforced walls that would stop small arms fire, and escape routes that would make it a functional safe house. Officially, it was damaged in a landslide and rebuilt by a grateful village, thankful for her ecological work. Unofficially, it became a forward operating base for America's most lethal ghost. The SEALs visited her once before she disappeared back into the mountains. They brought something unexpected, Marcus's rifle, recovered from Firebase Viper years ago and kept in storage. Patterson carried it like he was holding something sacred, presenting it to her with the kind of solemnity usually reserved for military funerals. "It should be with you," he said simply. "Both of you should be together again." Rachel took the rifle with shaking hands, recognizing every modification Marcus had made over their years together. He had named it patience, always joking that it was the one virtue she needed more of. The stock had wear marks from his cheek, the scope had his careful adjustments still marked in tiny scratches only she would recognize. Holding it was like holding a piece of him again, and she had to blink away tears that threatened to fall. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. Stevens cleared his throat awkwardly. "We also brought these." He held out a small wooden box, hand-carved with intricate detail. Inside, resting on dark velvet, were 6 challenge coins, one from each member of the team. "We know you can't carry them, can't risk having anything that connects you to us. But we wanted you to have them anyway. Maybe you could hide them somewhere safe, and when this is all over, when the war is done and Ghost Hawk can finally rest, you'll have something to remember." "To remember that 6 idiots owe you their lives," Martinez added with a sad smile. Rachel smiled, the first genuine smile any of them had seen from her. "I'll remember, but you don't owe me anything. We're even." "We'll never be even," Harrison said firmly. "Every life we save from now on, every mission we complete, every time we make it home to our families, that's because of you. That debt doesn't get repaid, it gets passed forward." The goodbye was harder than Rachel had expected. These men had gone from strangers to something like family in the span of weeks. But operational security demanded separation, demanded that Ghost Hawk return to the shadows where she was most effective. As their helicopter lifted off, carrying them back to their forward operating base, Rachel stood on the hospital's roof, watching until they disappeared into the morning haze. Then she turned and walked back into the mountains that had been her home for 3 years, back into the isolation she had chosen. But somehow, it felt different now. She wasn't alone anymore. Somewhere out there, 6 Navy SEALs knew she existed, knew she was watching over American forces. And in her pack, carefully wrapped in waterproof material, were 6 challenge coins that proved she mattered to someone, that her sacrifice hadn't gone unnoticed. The Taliban would continue hunting for Ghost Hawk, chasing shadows and rumors through the mountains. But they would never find her, because she had become something more than just a sniper. She had become a legend that existed in the space between myth and reality, a guardian angel for American forces who operated from the shadows. And whenever the mathematics turned impossible, whenever American lives hung in the balance, Ghost Hawk would emerge from the mountains to tip the scales. 6 months after the incident in the valley, Harrison's team was conducting a night operation in the Korengal when their point man spotted something unusual. A small pile of rocks arranged in a very specific pattern, one they had been briefed meant danger ahead. They altered their route by 300 meters and avoided an IED that would have killed half the team. There was no signature on the warning, no way to trace who had left it, but they knew. A year later, Martinez was leading a convoy through a mountain pass when he noticed unusual movement on the ridgeline above them. He called for the convoy to halt just as the first RPG streaked down from what would have been a perfect ambush position. As his team engaged the enemy fighters, he could have sworn he heard the distinctive crack of a large-caliber rifle from somewhere even higher up the mountain, and enemy fighters began falling from positions his team couldn't even see. The after-action report attributed it to unconfirmed friendly sniper support from unknown coalition forces. 2 years later, Stevens was mentoring a young SEAL team preparing for their first deployment to Afghanistan. He told them about the critical importance of listening to warnings regardless of the source, about the lethal danger of assumptions and arrogance. He told them about a wildlife researcher who had tried to save them from an ambush and been dismissed because she didn't look like a warrior. He didn't tell them she was Ghost Hawk. That secret would die with him. But he made sure they understood that heroes came in the most unexpected packages. Hit the like button if this story of sacrifice and redemption moved you. Share it with someone who needs to hear about real courage and selfless service. Subscribe and click the notification bell for more incredible stories of elite warriors who operate in the shadows. Our next video reveals another guardian angel whose identity will shock you. 3 years after that day in the valley, Patterson received an encrypted email with no sender information. It contained a single photograph, a sunrise over the Korengal Valley, peaceful and quiet, with a single raven perched on a rock in the foreground. The bird was looking directly at the camera, almost as if it knew who would see the image. The message read simply, "Still watching. Marcus says hello. Nobody." He showed it to the team when they gathered for their annual reunion, and they understood. Ghost Hawk was still out there, still protecting American forces, still carrying on her husband's legacy, one saved life at a time. She had found a way to live with her grief, to channel it into purpose that transcended personal pain. The war in Afghanistan would eventually wind down. American forces would begin their withdrawal, but the legend of the mountain ghost would persist. Taliban fighters would speak in hushed whispers around their fires about the sniper who could reach out from impossible distances, who seemed to know their plans before they made them, who protected American forces like a vengeful spirit. They would leave offerings at certain mountain shrines, hoping to appease her, not knowing that the ghost they feared was just a woman who had lost everything and chosen to keep fighting anyway. American forces would continue to report strange things, helpful intelligence appearing from anonymous sources, warnings that saved lives arriving just in time, and occasionally, on the worst days when everything seemed lost, the distinctive crack of a precision rifle from distances that shouldn't have been possible. The official reports would never mention Ghost Hawk, but among the special operations community, her legend grew with each telling. And in the mountains of Afghanistan, Rachel Walker continued her work. By day, she was a dedicated wildlife researcher, documenting snow leopard populations and ecological changes in the Hindu Kush. She published papers that were well received in academic circles, built a reputation as a serious scientist who worked in dangerous areas for the sake of conservation. The locals knew her as the quiet American woman who paid fairly for supplies, taught English to village children, and sometimes provided medical care with skills that seemed surprisingly advanced for a researcher. But when the sun set and the mountains turned dark and dangerous, she became something else entirely. She became Ghost Hawk, moving through the darkness with Marcus's rifle and her own devastating skills. She watched over convoys that never knew she was there, provided overwatch for patrols that had no idea they were being protected, and occasionally, when the situation demanded it, she reached out from impossible distances to tip the balance between life and death. The 6 challenge coins were hidden in a cave that only she knew about, a place she had discovered during her first year of isolation. They were wrapped in waterproof material along with the photograph of her and Marcus, his rifle cleaning kit that still smelled faintly of the gun oil he had preferred, and a few other precious mementos. It had become her shrine, her place of remembrance, where she went when the isolation became too heavy to bear alone. Sometimes, late at night when the mountains were quiet and the stars were bright enough to touch, she could almost feel Marcus beside her, not as a ghost or a haunting, but as a warm presence that approved of what she had become. She had taken their combined skills and transformed them into something neither of them could have been alone, a guardian angel who operated outside all rules and restrictions, who saved lives because it was right, not because anyone ordered her to. Years passed. The war officially ended. American forces completed their withdrawal from Afghanistan. But Ghost Hawk remained because the mountains had become her home, and protecting those who protected others had become her purpose. Even after the last American soldier left Afghan soil, she stayed, protecting the villages that had sheltered her, ensuring the children she had taught could grow up with at least a chance at peace. The 6 SEALs who knew the truth eventually retired from active duty, but they never forgot. Every year on the anniversary of that day in the valley, wherever they were in the world, they would gather if possible, or connect by secure video if not, and raise a glass to nobody, the woman who had saved them after they had dismissed her, who had taught them that true heroism doesn't always wear a uniform or carry official sanction. Harrison, who eventually made admiral, instituted an unofficial tradition in the special operations community. Before high-risk missions, operators would leave a single round at the base of the flagpole, not for luck, but as recognition that someone might be watching over them, someone they would never see but who would do everything possible to bring them home. He never explained the tradition's origin, but those who knew, knew. Stevens became an instructor at the Naval Special Warfare Center, teaching the next generation of SEALs. In every class, he would include a lesson about the vital importance of humility, about the danger of judging by appearances, about listening to anyone who might have useful intelligence regardless of their apparent status. He would tell them about a wildlife researcher who had tried to warn a SEAL team about an ambush, been dismissed and insulted, and then saved them anyway. He never mentioned Ghost Hawk by name, but his students understood that the story was more than just a training anecdote. Martinez learned to speak fluent Pashto and Dari, eventually becoming a liaison officer working with local forces in various capacities. He would sometimes hear whispers about the mountain ghost, the American sniper who could kill from impossible distances, who protected villages from Taliban reprisals, who had become something between legend and guardian spirit. He would listen carefully, file the intelligence away, and occasionally leave supplies at certain drop points in the mountains when he was in country. The supplies always disappeared, though he never saw who took them. Patterson kept the shell casing with "For Marcus" etched into it until the day he died, 30 years later, wearing it on a chain next to his dog tags through 3 more deployments, his wedding, the birth of his children, and finally his battle with cancer. In his will, he asked that it be returned to the mountains of Afghanistan, left at a specific set of coordinates he had memorized. His son, who had also become a SEAL, carried out the request, not understanding why his father wanted a shell casing left on a random mountain ridge. But when he placed it carefully on the rocks and turned to leave, he could have sworn he heard a whisper on the wind that sounded like "thank you." The legend of Ghost Hawk would eventually fade into myth, becoming one of those stories that special operations forces tell each other in the quiet hours before dawn. But Rachel Walker, the woman behind the legend, had found something she never expected in those mountains: peace. Not the peace of forgetting or moving on, but the peace of purpose, of knowing that Marcus's sacrifice continued to mean something every single day. On quiet nights, she would sit outside her hidden shelter, looking up at stars that seemed close enough to touch in the thin mountain air, and she would talk to Marcus. She would tell him about the lives saved, the families that remained whole, the children who would grow up with fathers because Ghost Hawk had been watching. And sometimes, when the wind was just right, she could almost hear his voice on the breeze, telling her he was proud, telling her to keep watching over them. Keep watching over them, Rach. They all deserve to come home. And so she did. Year after year, conflict after conflict, one life at a time. A ghost who refused to let death stop her from keeping a promise. A love story written in bullets and sacrifice. A guardian angel in a place where angels feared to tread. The mountains keep their secrets, and Ghost Hawk kept hers. But sometimes, if you know where to look and how to listen, you can still feel her presence in those ancient peaks. Watching, waiting, protecting, forever. 5 years had passed since that day in the valley, when Ghost Hawk saved 6 Navy SEALs who had dismissed her warnings. The war in Afghanistan had officially ended. The last American military transport had lifted off from Kabul airport, and the world had moved on to other conflicts, other crises. But in the mountains of the Hindu Kush, some wars never truly end. Rachel Walker stood on a ridge overlooking the Korangal Valley, the sunrise painting the peaks in shades of gold and crimson. At 37, she moved with the same fluid grace that had made her legendary, though anyone watching closely might notice she favored her left side slightly, a reminder of the wound she'd taken saving those SEALs. Her hair, once kept in a tight military bun, now fell to her shoulders, streaked with premature gray that she didn't bother to hide. The locals called it wisdom hair, a mark of someone who had seen too much but continued to stand watch. She raised her binoculars, the same pair Marcus had given her for their 3rd anniversary, and scanned the valley below. 3 vehicles were moving along the dirt road, too fast for local traffic, too organized to be random. She'd been tracking this particular group for 6 weeks now, ever since intercepting communications about a meeting that shouldn't be happening, involving people who shouldn't know each other. Her satellite phone, one of the encrypted models that officially didn't exist, vibrated against her hip. She checked up the caller ID, a number that showed as all zeros, which meant only one person. "Nash," she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ghost, we have a problem." Colonel Robert Nash, now retired but still connected to every shadow organization in the intelligence community, never called unless something significant was happening. "One of your SEALs has gone missing." Rachel's blood chilled. "Which one?" "Stevens. He was in Pakistan working private security for a diplomatic convoy. The convoy was hit 3 days ago. Everyone else was accounted for, dead or alive. Stevens vanished. She was already moving, packing her observation post with practiced efficiency. "Send me everything you have." "There's more," Nash continued, his voice carrying a weight that made Rachel pause. Before he disappeared, Stevens sent an encrypted message to Patterson. Just 2 words: "Ghost Hawk." Rachel stopped packing. If Stevens had invoked her name, if he'd broken operational security after 5 years of silence, then something extraordinary was happening. What was he investigating? Officially? Nothing. Unofficially? He'd been tracking rumors about a new player in the region, someone calling themselves the Architect, been recruiting former special operations personnel from multiple countries, building something that has every intelligence agency nervous. And Stevens found them? We think they found him. Rachel, there's something else. 3 weeks ago, a sniper took out a Taliban commander in Helmand province. Single shot, 2,200 meters, through a sandstorm. The Taliban is claiming Ghost Hawk is operating in multiple locations simultaneously. Rachel felt her chest tighten. "That's impossible. I was here, 800 kilometers away. I know, which means either someone is copying your techniques, or there's another ghost out there." Rachel finished the thought that had been haunting her for months. She'd been finding signs, precision shots she hadn't taken, warnings left for American contractors she hadn't placed, intelligence reports submitted with her digital signature that she hadn't sent. "I'm sending you coordinates for Stevens's last known position," Nash said. "But Rachel, this isn't an official request. Hell, you don't officially exist. If you go after him, I'm on my own, I know." It was the same arrangement they'd had for 5 years. Ghost Hawk operated in the spaces between official recognition and complete deniability. "Nash, the vehicles I'm tracking, they're heading toward the Pakistan border, same region where Stevens disappeared." There was a pause on the line. "That's not a coincidence." "No," Rachel agreed. "Someone's drawing me out. Using Stevens as bait." "Then don't go." Rachel smiled grimly. "You know I can't do that. He invoked my name. That means he's counting on me, even if it's a trap." After ending the call, Rachel made her way back to her hidden shelter, a cave system she'd expanded and reinforced over the years. Inside, behind a false wall that would fool all but the most determined searchers, was her arsenal. Marcus's rifle, her own custom Remington, enough ammunition to sustain a small war, and the 6 challenge coins from the SEALs, still wrapped in their waterproof covering. She picked up one of the coins, Stevens's coin, running her thumb over the raised seal of Naval Special Warfare. She remembered his face that day in the hospital, the shame in his eyes when he learned who she really was, the determination in his voice when he promised to keep her secret. A soft sound from outside made her freeze. Someone was approaching her shelter, moving with deliberate noise to announce their presence. Only 3 types of people knew about this place: local shepherds, who sometimes brought her supplies, the Taliban who had been hunting her for years, and "Ms. Rachel," a young voice called in accented English. "Ms. Rachel, are you there?" She recognized the voice. Amal, one of the village children she'd been teaching. The boy was 12, bright as a star, with dreams of becoming a doctor. She emerged from the cave to find him standing nervously at the entrance, holding an envelope. Amal, what are you doing here? It's dangerous. A man came to the village, the boy said, his eyes wide with fear and excitement. A foreign man, very tall, very quiet. He said to give this to the American woman who teaches English. He said to tell Ghost Hawk that the shadows have shadows. Rachel's hand moved instinctively to her concealed pistol. Where is this man now? He left immediately, but Ms. Rachel, he knew your name, your real name. He called you Captain Walker. She took the envelope with steady hands, though her mind was racing. Her cover had held for 5 years. Only a handful of people knew the truth. If someone was using her real name openly. Amal, go home. Take the long path through the lower valley. Don't come back here for at least a week. The boy nodded, understanding that something serious was happening. As he disappeared down the mountain path, Rachel opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph and a brief note. The photograph made her legs weak. It was Marcus, taken 3 weeks before his death, standing in front of a building she didn't recognize. But that wasn't what made her hands shake. In the background, partially visible, was another figure, someone she would recognize anywhere, even in a blurry photograph. It was herself. But the photo was dated 6 months ago, 3 years after Marcus had died. The note was written in Marcus's handwriting, which was impossible. It read simply, "The game was never what you thought it was. Stevens knows the truth. Find him before they make him disappear like they tried to make me disappear. Trust no one, not even your ghosts. M." Rachel sank to her knees, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Marcus was dead. She'd heard his last words over the radio, heard the airstrike that he'd called on his own position. Nash had shown her the after-action reports, the crater where his position had been. No one could have survived that, but the photograph. Her tactical mind reasserted itself, pushing through the emotional shock. Someone was playing an elaborate game, using her past, her pain, her loyalty to manipulate her. But Stevens was still missing, and whether this was a trap or not, she couldn't abandon him. She returned to her shelter and began preparing for a journey into Pakistan, into what was almost certainly a trap. As she packed, she noticed something she'd overlooked before. One of her ammunition boxes had been disturbed. Someone had been in her shelter, her most secure sanctuary. They had left the photograph where she would find it, but Amal's arrival suggested they hadn't expected her to receive it that way, which meant there were multiple players in this game. Her satellite phone buzzed again. This time it was Patterson, using an emergency frequency they'd established but never used. "Ghost, something's wrong." His voice was tense, scared even. "I've been getting messages, photos of Stevens. He's alive, but they're doing things to him, and there's someone with him in the photos, someone who looks exactly like you." Rachel's blood ran cold. "That's impossible. I'm here. I know. But I'm looking at a video timestamp from 6 hours ago showing you interrogating Stevens in some kind of facility. Same height, same build, same way of moving. Ghost, what the hell is going on?" Before she could answer, she heard it. The distinctive sound of helicopter rotors, multiple aircraft, approaching fast. Military aircraft, but not American. The rotor pattern was wrong. These were Russian-made Mi-24s, heavily armed and heading directly for her position. "Patterson, I have to go. Find everything you can about someone called the Architect. And Patrick, watch your 6. Someone's playing a game with all of us." She grabbed her go bag, Marcus's rifle, and the photograph, then triggered the thermite charges she'd installed years ago. Her shelter and everything in it would be reduced to slag in minutes. Ghost Hawk was going completely dark, deeper than she'd ever gone before. As she vanished into the mountains, she knew better than anyone alive. She caught a glimpse of the helicopters circling her former position. They weren't firing. They were searching. They wanted her alive. 300 kilometers away, in a facility that didn't appear on any map, Stevens hung from chains in a cell that could have been anywhere in the world. His face was bruised, his body bore the marks of professional interrogation, but his eyes remained defiant. The woman standing in front of him wore Rachel Walker's face, moved with her precise economy of motion, even spoke with her slight accent that came out under stress. But Stevens knew it wasn't her. The eyes were wrong. Ghost Hawk's eyes carried the weight of loss, the burden of survival guilt, the quiet strength of someone who'd chosen duty over peace. This woman's eyes were cold, calculating, devoid of the humanity that made Rachel dangerous in ways that went beyond her trigger finger. "You can stop pretending," he said through split lips. I know you're not her." The woman smiled, a perfect imitation of Rachel's rare smile, but somehow wrong, like an AI trying to reproduce human emotion. "How can you be so sure, Stevens? After all, you only met the real Ghost Hawk once. Perhaps this is who she really is when the mask comes off." Rachel Walker would die before she'd work with someone like the architect, would she? Even if she discovered that her husband's death wasn't what she believed, even if she learned that Marcus Walker is very much alive? Stevens kept his face neutral, despite the shock. Marcus is dead. He called an airstrike on his own position. He called an airstrike on an empty position while he was extracted by a team that had been watching Ghost Team for months. The architect has been collecting exceptional individuals for years, Stevens. Sometimes through recruitment, sometimes through creative extraction. The door to the cell opened, and another figure entered. Stevens's blood froze. It was Marcus Walker, or someone who looked exactly like him. The same tall frame, the same weathered face, the same way of walking that Rachel had described in one of her rare moments of vulnerability. "Hello, Stevens," the man said in Marcus's voice. "I understand you've been looking for me." 1,200 kilometers away, the real Rachel Walker moved through the Pakistani mountains like a ghost made flesh. She'd crossed the border using paths known only to smugglers and wild animals, avoiding the military patrols that had mysteriously intensified in the past 48 hours. Her destination was a compound hidden in a valley that satellites couldn't properly survey due to persistent cloud cover that seemed too consistent to be natural. According to the intelligence Nash had provided, this was Stevens' last known location. But as she established an observation position overlooking the compound, she realized she wasn't the first one there. Someone had left a rifle, perfectly positioned, with a clear line of sight to the compound's main building. Her rifle. Not Marcus's rifle that she carried, but her personal custom Remington that should have been destroyed in her shelter. Next to it was another note. "You're late. He's in the eastern building, 3rd floor, 4th window from the left. You have 6 minutes before they move him. Choose carefully. Save Stevens or discover the truth about Marcus. You can't do both." A friend who knows what it's like to be a ghost. Rachel's hands trembled as she picked up the rifle, checking it automatically. It was definitely hers. Every scratch, every modification exactly as she remembered. The scope had already been adjusted for range and wind. Someone had prepared this shot for her. Through the scope, she could see Stevens in the indicated window. He was suspended from chains, but alive. In another building, she caught a glimpse of movement, a tall figure that moved like Marcus, stood like Marcus, but she only had a split second of visual before he disappeared. Her finger found the trigger. 6 minutes to decide. Save the SEAL who had risked his life for her, or chase a ghost that couldn't possibly be real. The mathematics were simple. The choice was impossible. A voice crackled through a radio that had been left next to the rifle. "Hello, Rachel." She recognized the voice immediately, though she hadn't heard it in 8 years. It was her sister Emma, who had supposedly died in a car accident the year before Rachel met Marcus. "Emma's dead," Rachel said flatly, her eye never leaving the scope. "Death is a flexible concept in our line of work," the voice replied. "You should know that better than anyone, Ghost Hawk. After all, you've been dead for 5 years. What do you want?" "To offer you the truth. Stevens is bait, you've figured that out, but not for the reason you think. The architect isn't trying to capture you, Rachel. The architect is trying to recruit you. And before you refuse, you should know, Marcus isn't the only one who survived their supposed death." Through the scope, Rachel saw Stevens's guards suddenly collapse. Someone else was in the building, eliminating threats with surgical precision. She caught a glimpse of the operator, moving like her, shooting like her, a perfect mirror of her own techniques. "Who is that?" she demanded. "That," Emma's voice said with something like pride, "is your replacement. Ghost Hawk 2.0, you might say, genetically modified, enhanced training from birth, and programmed with every technique you ever developed. The architect's masterpiece. That's impossible." "Is it? You've been operating alone for 5 years, Rachel. Did you really think the government would just let Ghost Hawk's legacy die with you? They've been building better versions, stronger, faster, without all that messy humanity getting in the way." Stevens was free now, the other operative efficiently cutting his bonds and providing him with a weapon. But something was wrong. Stevens was shaking his head, backing away from his rescuer. Through the scope, Rachel could see why. The operative's face was hidden, but her build, her movement, everything screamed that this was another Rachel Walker. 5 minutes, Emma's voice reminded her. In 5 minutes, a convoy will arrive. In that convoy is someone you need to see. Someone who has been trying to find you for 3 years. Rachel's phone buzzed with an incoming message from Nash. Abort. Abort. It's a trap. They're not trying to capture you. They're trying to turn you. The architect is... The message cut off mid-sentence. Through the scope, she saw the convoy approaching dust clouds in the distance, marking their approach. 3 vehicles, heavily armed, moving fast. The other operative had gotten Stevens to the ground floor, but they were pinned down by security forces that had responded to the alarm. Rachel made her decision. She adjusted her aim slightly and began firing, not at the security forces, but at specific structural points that would create cover for Stevens and his rescuer. Her shots were perfect, each one creating a cascade of debris that provided protection while herding them toward the only viable exit. But as she fired, she noticed something strange. The other operative was anticipating her shots, moving in perfect synchronization as if they shared the same mind. It was like watching herself from the outside, a perfect dance of death, choreographed by someone who knew her thoughts before she thought them. The convoy had arrived. The lead vehicle's door opened and a figure stepped out. Even at this distance, even through the scope, Rachel knew that silhouette. Her finger froze on the trigger. It was Marcus. Not someone who looked like Marcus, not a clever fake, but Marcus himself. She knew it in her bones, in her soul, in the part of her that had died with him 3 years ago. He looked up directly at her position, though she was over 2,000 meters away and perfectly concealed. He raised his hand to his ear, speaking into a radio, and her abandoned radio crackled to life with a voice she'd thought she'd never hear again. Hello, Rach. I'm sorry for the deception, but it was the only way to keep you safe. There's so much you don't know, so much I need to tell you. The war you thought we were fighting, it was never about terrorism. It's about something much bigger. And Ghost Hawk, you were never just a sniper. You were the prototype for something that's going to change everything. Rachel's world tilted. Everything she'd believed, everything she'd mourned, everything she'd built her life around for the past 3 years was crumbling. But her tactical mind kept working, kept processing. This could still be an elaborate deception. Technology existed to fake voices, to create perfect physical doubles. Prove it, she said into the radio. Tell me something only Marcus would know. There was a pause, then, the night before our first mission together, you couldn't sleep. You came to my room at 0200 and we sat on the roof watching the stars. You asked me if I thought we were doing the right thing, if killing from a distance made us cowards. I told you that. That courage isn't about how you fight, but why you fight, Rachel finished, tears running down her face. No one else knew about that conversation. They'd never told anyone, never written it down. I need you to trust me one more time, Rach. Put down the rifle and come in. There's a war coming that makes Afghanistan look like a training exercise. And the only way we survive it is together. Through the scope, Rachel saw Stevens and the other operative reach Marcus's position. Stevens was looking up at her hiding spot, his expression pleading. The other operative had removed her face covering, revealing features that were heartbreakingly similar to Rachel's own, but younger, unmarked by loss and war. She's your daughter, Rach, Marcus's voice said softly. Ours. You were pregnant when I died. They told you the stress caused a miscarriage, but that was another lie. They took her, raised her, trained her to be what you are, but she escaped, just like you did. She's been the other ghost, the one taking shots you didn't take, leaving warnings you didn't leave. She's been trying to find you. Rachel's hands were shaking so badly she had to put down the rifle. A daughter she'd been told had died before taking her first breath. A daughter who had inherited her skills, her burden, her ghost. How do I know any of this is real? She asked, her voice breaking. You don't, Marcus admitted. But isn't that always the gambler's choice? Trust or isolation, connection or safety? You've been alone for 3 years, Rach, carrying my ghost. But I'm not a ghost. I'm here, we're here, and we need you. Below in the compound, more vehicles were arriving. But these weren't military vehicles. Rachel recognized the markings. UN peacekeepers. What were they doing here? Her satellite phone rang. It was Harrison, now Admiral Harrison. Ghost, whatever you're seeing down there, it's not what you think. We've been tracking a major international conspiracy for 3 years. Someone's been building a private army of enhanced soldiers, recruiting from special forces worldwide. Stevens volunteered to be captured to infiltrate them. That compound you're looking at? It's not what it seems. What is it? Rachel asked, though she suspected she already knew. It's ours. It's a black site so secret that most of the government doesn't know it exists. The architect isn't the enemy, Ghost. The architect is us. And Marcus Walker, he's been running it for 3 years. The pieces clicked into place in Rachel's mind. The elaborate deception, the faked death, the years of isolation. It hadn't been about protecting her. It had been about creating her, forging her into something beyond a simple sniper. She had become a legend, a ghost story that terrified enemies and inspired allies. And now they wanted to mass produce her. The girl, she said. My daughter. Subject 7, Harrison confirmed. Though she prefers to be called Sarah, she has your skills, your instincts, but enhanced through genetic modification and training from birth. She's what you could have been if we'd started earlier. She's my daughter, Rachel said coldly, not a subject. She's both, just like you're both Ghost Hawk and Rachel Walker. The question is, what are you going to do now that you know the truth? Through the scope, Rachel watched as Marcus helped Stevens into one of the vehicles. Sarah, her daughter, the name hit her like a physical blow, stood guard, her positioning perfect, her awareness absolute. She was 17 years old and already one of the deadliest people on the planet. I'm going to do what I always do, Rachel said, making her decision. I'm going to protect American lives, but on my terms, not yours. She stood up, abandoning concealment, making herself visible to everyone in the compound below. It was the most exposed she'd been in 5 years, but she was done hiding, done being a ghost. Marcus looked up at her, and even at this distance, she could see him smile. Sarah turned as well, and Rachel could see her own eyes looking back at her, filled with a mixture of hope and wariness. Welcome back from the dead, Ghost Hawk, Harrison said, again. But as Rachel began picking her way down the slope toward the compound, toward the family she'd thought she'd lost, toward answers she wasn't sure she wanted, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. High above, barely visible against the afternoon sun, were drones, not American drones. She knew their signatures. These were something else, something new. And they weren't just observing, they were targeting. Harrison, she said urgently into the phone, you need to evacuate that compound now. You've got incoming. The first missile struck before she could finish the warning, turning the world into fire and chaos. Through the smoke and flames, she could see Marcus pulling Stevens to cover, could see Sarah moving with inhuman speed to engage threats. But there were too many missiles, too many angles of attack. Rachel ran toward the chaos, no longer Ghost Hawk, no longer nobody, just a mother and wife trying to reach her family before it was too late. As she ran, one thought burned through her mind. Someone else was playing this game. Someone beyond the architect, beyond the conspiracy Harrison had described. Someone who had waited for all the players to be in one place before making their move. The real war hadn't started yet, but it was about to. And Ghost Hawk would be right in the middle of it, whether she was ready or not.